In the beginning there was neither light nor darkness, only the whirl. It was not until Altheic emerged thence in his nakedness did time take its first step forward. With him the Keeper also carried weight, and with weight were the realms of land and firmament defined. Yet Altheic was not alone over long, for soon from the whirl did another step forth. Her name was Nymea, and she was but a mewling babe who could do naught but weep, and soon her tears had created a vast lake. Altheic, seeking companionship in the empty realm of his creation, took the young goddess under his wing and cared for her as one would a daughter. As Nymea grew, however, so too did their love for one another, until it could no longer be contained, culminating in a divine coupling which resulted in the birth of two holy daughters, Azima the sun and Menfina the moon. And with their advent was day and night conceived. So did countless cycles of light and darkness pass, before from the whirl once again did another step forth. The lake, bearer of wisdom and knowledge, looked upon the silent and unchanging lake left by Nymea's tears, and coaxed from it a river to carry that water to the far corners of the realm. Azima, drawn to Thalic's sagecy, professed her love to the new deity, and begot him two daughters, the first being Limlane, who took the water created by her grandmother and expanded it into the world's seas. The second daughter was the lonely Nofika, who, wanting for companionship, created her own playmates, and thus brought life into the world. It was not until life had spread throughout the land and newly created seas that a new god appeared, though whence the others did not know, for the world lay dormant. His name was Oshon, and where he wandered did towering mountains rise from level plains. With the formation of these spires did cold wind flow from on high to the warm seas and back up again, carrying life that was once reserved for land and water into the skies. Those winds did bring love into the heart of Limlane, yet though she longed to be with Oshon, his wanderlust prevented the two from ever being joined over long, and lo, did they never beget children of their own. This was a time of great creation, but also of great chaos. Oshon's mountains rose and fell at his whims, the lake's rivers flowed hither and thither, and Limlane's seas ever expanded, swallowing entire swaths of land before even the gods knew they were gone. To bring order to this chaos, Nymea pried forth a mighty comet from the heavens and gave it life, directing it down to the world that it may destroy the excess her sons and daughters had wrought, while bringing harmony once again to the realm. And for many days and nights was the world calm, the gods content in the order which now reigned supreme. That was until the world woke from its slumber and beckoned forth two final deities, Birgot and his younger sister Halone. It was feared that the untamed and ambitious siblings might once again usher chaos into the world, so to see that they were properly disciplined, Nymea quickly made them wards of Ralgar the Destroyer. A builder by nature, Birgot resented his new stepfather who could teach him only destruction, choosing instead to spend most of his time in the tutelage of Thalake. The scholar bestowed upon the eager student the knowledge he would use to forge the tools and techniques of creation. Though more open to her new father's teachings, Halone too grew restless, longing to test her strength. An opportunity arose when Oshon invited the young goddess on one of his journeys. It was during these travels that Halone's ambition slowly transformed into a lust for battle. While on the road, she would challenge every creature she met, honing her skills and methodically devising new techniques for killing. When Nofika, mother of life, learned of Halone's wanton destruction of her creations, she was angered beyond words and swore revenge, but the fury ignored the matron's challenges, widening the rift between the two. Oshon, feeling responsible for the rift, devised a plan to calm Nofika. From within the mountains of his creation, Oshon summoned forth a font of magma which spewed forth onto the land. Upon cooling, the magma took the form of the 12th and final god, the dual-aspected Naldthal. With Naldthal, Oshon had provided a god to oversee the souls of those who had met their death and provide them peace in the afterlife. Satisfied with that her creations would no longer wander the void aimlessly, Nofika agreed to a truce with Halone, and with the advent of the 12th and final god was the pantheon complete. But before they could call an end to their toil, they first required a realm in which they could reside and watch over their myriad creation. To this end, they created the seven heavens, and to there did they finally retreat, bequeathing the rule of Eorzea to mankind. That was the modern creation myth commonly accepted throughout Eorzea. Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first of a 3-part lore series that'll cover basically everything you need to know before your characters start their journey on Eorzea. This series will contain a lore spoiler warning, so things we'll be discussing are revealed throughout the MSQ, but nothing will actually ruin the plot, so I'll defer to you if you want to continue. Today we'll be looking a bit more at the 12, how Aether and Magic work in the universe, and lastly just run through modern geography for the world. Next episode we'll start in the timeline and go from the Ascians to the Alligans, then the one after that we're going from the Ice Age to when your character first takes takes their steps into the world. This year I'll be expanding into some more lore videos for different games, mini reviews, and more video essays, so if any of that sounds of interest to you, please like and subscribe below. With that late intro out of the way, let's begin by discussing Aether and Magic. Now, first and foremost, there is a technical difference between Aether and Magic. Aether is the fundamental building blocks of creation. Everything that exists is made of Aether, down to our very souls. Magic, by contrast, is what happens when Aether is manipulated to cast a spell. To give an out-of-universe example, consider a firebender in the Avatar universe. Fire as an element exists all throughout the world as part of the balance of Aether that comprises existence, but when a firebender then uses that energy in the world to bend, they're casting magic. In Final Fantasy XIV, most magic though doesn't use Aether that is just throughout the world, but that of the mages themselves. As creatures that exist on the material plane, all mortals are comprised of Aether as well, and it's by using your own reserves of Aether, either of body or soul, that the vast majority of magic or magical interactions take place. Think about how one attunes to an Aetherite or magical item, for instance. It's a bond between your Aether and that of the object. It's interestingly why eating and drinking is especially important in the Final Fantasy XIV universe, as that food is made of Aether too. It's very literally refilling your body, soul, and pool of magic. The only exception to this general rule is black magic, which does actually rely on Aether throughout the world instead of their own. Now, it's worth breaking Aether down a little bit more, as there are 6 distinct elements that it comes into: lightning, fire, earth, ice, water, and wind, in kind of that order. The basic concept being that when lightning strikes, it ignites fire. Whatever fire touches turns to ash and so creates earth. When earth forms, it shelters places from the sun, and so ice is created. Ice eventually melts and so creates water. Water turns to mist, and thus wind is born. And to go full circle, with the wind grows clouds, and in those clouds is lightning born. This is effectively the natural cycle of the elements that balance out the world. Interestingly, going back to the creation myth from the very beginning, the world that all the gods came out of is just an absolute mess of Aether without much rhyme or reason. The first god, Althik, is earth aspected, and then Nymea, who came second, is water, which should normally have come after ice, so in some cases the Aether wheel on a cosmic level is a little more flexible, at least at the beginning of the universe. Talking about the 12, however, as I just implied, all of them represent a certain type of Aether, divided equally, so 2 gods per element. As the creation myth is pretty long, I'll quickly go over the names, what they're known for, and what their aspect is, in order of those elements. The lightning gods are Ralgar the Destroyer, breaker of worlds and god of destruction, and Biragot the Builder, god of industry. The gods of fire are Zima the Warden, keeper of the sun, and Naldthal the Trader, overseer of the underworld and god of commerce. The deities of earth are Althik the Keeper, god of space and time, and Nofika the Matron, goddess of natural abundance. The ice-aspected deities are Menfina the Lover, keeper of the twin moons, Halone the Fury, goddess of war. The gods of water, Nymea the Spinner, goddess of fate, and Thalik the Scholar, god of knowledge. And lastly, the gods of air. Limlane the Navigator is goddess of navigation, patron of the best city-state Limsa the Mincer, and Oshan the Wanderer, ruler of the mountains and god of wanderers. What each aspect the gods are becomes important in a little way, as, just to recall the last line of the creation myth, to this end they created the 7 heavens, and to there did they finally retreat. 6 of those 7 heavens are all Aether aspected, with the 7th being high heaven to rule them all. What's not mentioned in the myth, however, is what is called the pit. The pit is an absolutely giant place that exists basically as the dumping ground for all of the heavens above. Where the heavens drop their waste ether creates what is effectively separate elemental hells, as different sinners go to different heavens and then are thrown off of them into the pit. Each of the gods mostly spend their time in their own Aether's heaven, with the high heaven being not controlled by anything as far as we know, just existing to keep balance between the gods. As it's entirely possible these heavens may become zones in a far-flung expansion in Final Fantasy XIV, as who knows where the story is going to go from here, I'll quickly give you an idea to what each of these heavens and their corresponding hells are, and how you might end up there depending on your virtues or sins in life. The Heaven of Fire is a seemingly endless golden city, home to the fair and honest, while the Fire of Hell is a pit of flaming rubble from the city's construction, where people who took bribes or judged people wrongly burn. The Heaven of Water is a nondescript landmass with the large river of stars infused with pure knowledge running through it. This becomes the home of scholars and inventors. Water's Hell is all the stagnant water that falls from the heaven into the large sea where false prophets and counterfeiters go to drown eternally. The Heaven of Wind is twofold. The god Oshan stays in his towering mountain range whilst he watches his love Limlane travel an endless sea. Gusts of terrible wind on occasion blow from this heaven down into the pit, where they incite malicious gusts that tear the very soul from flesh of bandits and defilers of the world. A giant ice palace crafted by frozen moonbeams defines the ice of heaven, the final resting place for epic heroes and gallant knights. On occasion, frozen icicles fall from on high here, however, to form the hell of ice where cowards, deserters, and of course the most vile of all, adulterers go. In the heaven of lightning, you'll find a colossal clockwork spire which becomes home to engineers, architects, and the conquerors of evil. Lightning that sparks off the many bits of equipment will naturally descend into the pit, leaving an electrified hellscape for slumlords and warmongers. Then the last heaven, that of earth, is dominated by a single huge tree. Planted by Nofika, the goddess of nature, and matured through the manipulation of time by Althik, this becomes home to farmers, historians, and archaeologists. Then the leaves that naturally fall from this tree all float down into the pit, where they eventually rot and bury thieves, liars, and revisionists. Even after discussing the heavens, the pit, the gods, magic, and just how the entire universe works, ultimately the most important thing to keep in mind is those 6 basic building blocks of reality: lightning, fire, earth, ice, water, and wind. Everything as a general rule of thumb, we'll go back to that. While not nearly as important, before we get into the geography of modern Eorzea, I would be remiss not to mention a less understood force in the universe, that of dynamis. While barely understood or recorded, it is effectively an energy that is totally derived from emotions. Think a less hardcore version of the warp from Warhammer 40k, as emotions fuel it, and it in return can have a minor impact on reality. The most common occurrence of this would be mortals doing things that would seem impossible through sheer determination. That feeling of determination forming a kind of feedback loop with dynamis to empower you that little bit more than would otherwise be the case. As I said, this is a barely understood phenomenon, its origins are totally unknown, and it doesn't appear to have much of an impact on the universe for the most part, but it is still a force in that universe nonetheless. So now we get to the geography of the world that the gods left behind. Before we begin, it should be noted that Eorzea, for the most part, normally refers to just the continent of Aldenard, and not the world itself. The world, or star, as they're used a little interchangeably throughout the game, is named Hydaelyn. So you have Hydaelyn the god, and Hydaelyn the world/star. As we go throughout the world, I'll do my best to give some real-life examples a little later on, as a couple of the regions we've never seen, or just scratched the surface of in-game, so it should give you a better idea of what you're thinking there. To start, the largest continuous landmass by a significant margin are the 3 great continents: Aldenard, Isilbard, and Othard. The westmost of these 3 is Aldenard, where the majority of our time in Final Fantasy XIV takes place, as it is the future home of the Eorzean city-states. It's also one of the most naturally wealthiest places throughout the world, both in natural resources and just raw aether. Connected to Aldenard by an isthmus in the middle of the 3 continents is Isilbard. This continent stretches the furthest north and by far has the harshest weather of all the continents. The biggest defining feature of the continent is the largest mountain range in the entire world, which separates the continent effectively into 2 sections, the north of which would eventually become Garlemald. Then last is Othard in the far east. It's the smallest of the 3 great continents, but is one of the most varied by ecology and terrain. There are permanently snowy peaks that separate Othard and Isilbard, large rolling grasslands, hilly terrains perfect for rice paddies, and the largest watercourse known as the One River, flowing from mountains to the sea, and then, to cap it all off, is a wide set of islands off the east coast in the Ruby Sea. For the real-world equivalents, these 3 are the equivalent of how Europe, Africa, and Asia are all connected by land, forming the vast majority of land throughout the world. Although, just as it is in real life, there are more than just these 3. The other 2 continents of note are Meracedia and the New World. To continue the Earth metaphor, Meracedia would be Australia, far south of the 3 great continents, below the equator, and largely uninhabitable for reasons we'll touch on in the next episode. It is only really known for being where most of the dragons settle down, with a few tribes of mortals which live in harmony with them. Both the tribes and the dragons are actively hostile to outsiders, so very little is known about Meracedia on both a cultural and terrain level. The New World, by comparison, is both a little more friendly and known, except for, unfortunately, the terrain. We do know that it's far west of Aldenard, and can be pretty reasonably assumed that it's akin to the Americas just based on the name. The largest civilization on the continent is known as the Mamuljar, discovered by Limsa Laminsa sailors. Although we again don't know much about them, except that mercenaries from the civilization occasionally make the journey across the ocean known as the Indigo Deep to Eorzea to sell their services during times of unrest. The last 3 places to look at throughout the world are by no means continents, and so I'll go through them a little more quickly. First is Thavnir, a fairly self-contained island south of Isilbard, large enough for a self-sustaining city-state, state, but not much else. Second is the southern seas, which lie between the three great continents and Meracedia and form a large archipelago chain around the equator. And lastly is the northern empty. North of Aldenald, it is largely devoid of islands with two exceptions, an archipelago known as Arsaland, and a second group of islands that became known as Old Charlian at the turn of the 6th Aetherial Era. So to just give a recap of rough Earth equivalents, just to help it settle in your mind, as this is really a ton of information. Aldenard is Europe, Isilbard is Russia, Othard is Asia, Thavnir is a small India that disconnected itself from Asia, the South Seas are Polynesia, Meracedia is Australia, the New Worlds are the Americas, and then finally the Northern Empty is Iceland and Greenland. Thank you all for joining me today to get a picture of the universe and the world. Comment below if you think I've missed anything or what you'd like to see a lore video on after the next two parts of the timeline. Next week we'll be starting the history of this world, starting with the moment when the gods return to the heavens. So if you're interested, make sure you subscribe to see that, like and comment so others can see it too, and if you don't feel like doing any of that, then at least have an excellent day.